You're 64 years old, and that $742.31 monthly OAS check is sitting there, waiting. Every calculator you've plugged your numbers into says the same thing. Wait until 70, and you get a guaranteed 36% increase. It sounds like the easiest decision you'll make this decade. But there's a number those calculators never show you. $44,539. That's the exact amount a typical Canadian couple gives up if the higher earning spouse dies just 1 year before hitting age 70. Not lost to taxes, not lost to inflation, handed back simply for waiting. We're told deferring OAS is about maximizing the benefit, and for the person who lives long enough to collect it, that's true. But for the spouse left behind, deferring can create a recovery period stretching 7 to 10 years, where the household lives on less while trying to earn back money it never had to give up in the first place. Is it better to take OAS at 65 or wait until 70? Most videos answer that with a simple break-even chart, 2 lines crossing somewhere in your late 70s. Today we're looking at the version of that chart nobody draws, the one for the person who might be sitting alone in that house 5 years from now. Once you see the survivor side of this math, waiting until 70 stops looking like the simple win it's sold as. Before you leave $742.31 a month on the table for the next 5 years, you need to see what happens to the person who could be left behind. If you care about your own security, and your spouse's as much as a theoretical government maximum, subscribe to the Playbook. We build plans for real households, not just spreadsheets. Defer your OAS to 70, and if you pass away at 69, your spouse receives $0 in OAS survivor benefits, not a reduced check, just nothing. CPP pays a survivor pension. OAS does not. That's the piece most calculators skip. OAS pays you as an individual, not your household. When one spouse dies, the family loses an entire pillar of guaranteed inflation-protected income permanently. Look at what deferring actually costs. Wait from 65 to 70, and you give up roughly $44,539 in payments over those 60 months. Your check grows from $742.31 to $1,009.54, a $267.23 monthly increase. Divide one by the other, and it takes 166 months, nearly 14 years, of collecting the bigger check just to break even. Die at 71, and that $44,539 never comes back. I've watched this happen to real couples, and it's rarely framed as a mistake. It gets framed as bad luck. Nobody sits down and plans around the idea that they might die at 69, so the calculators that show a 36% increase never show this side of the ledger either. Canada's own pension rules explain the gap. Old age security is built as an individual, non-inheritable benefit. CPP, by contrast, passes a survivor benefit to a spouse. That single design choice is the entire reason this trap exists. It isn't a flaw in your planning. It's a gap in how the benefit itself was built. Financial advisors often talk about this decision purely in terms of internal rate of return, how much the deferral itself is worth over time. What that framing leaves out is the household liquidity gap that opens up the moment the higher earning spouse is no longer there to collect either check. There's a trade-off nobody puts on the whiteboard. Waiting for a bigger check improves your odds if you both live well into your 90s. But it also means 5 years where your household carries more risk than it needs to, in exchange for a payout that only shows up if the higher earning spouse survives long enough to collect it. You're not really choosing between more money and less money. You're choosing between guaranteed income now and a bet on your own longevity. If you're the one filling out the deferral paperwork, ask yourself a quieter question. Not just can I afford to wait, but what does my household look like on the day I'm gone if that day comes sooner than I've planned for? That's not pessimism. That's just doing the math with a full data set. But what if you both make it well past 90? Does the math flip back in favor of waiting? It does. And there's a specific window between 65 and 70 where that decision quietly turns into a tax strategy too. Between 65 and 70, most Canadians sit in the lowest taxable income window they'll see for the rest of retirement. If you're not yet collecting OAS or CPP, and your RRSP withdrawals are still a choice rather than a requirement, that's 5 years to reshape how much tax you pay for the next 20. Call it the strategic drawdown window. The idea isn't just waiting for a bigger OAS check at the end of it. It's using those 5 quiet years to pull money out of your RRSP on purpose, at a tax rate you control, before the government starts forcing your hand. The timing matters because of what happens at 72. That's when RRIF withdrawals become mandatory, whether you need the income or not. Add that forced withdrawal to CPP, to OAS, to any pension income, and plenty of retirees find themselves pushed past $95,323 in net income and into the OAS recovery tax zone, losing 15 cents of every dollar above that line. Take OAS at 65 while you're also drawing a full salary or a large RRSP withdrawal, and you can trip that threshold years earlier than expected. Wait, and use that gap to melt your RRSP into a TFSA a little at a time, and you shrink the RRIF balance that would otherwise push you over the line later. I used to tell people to take the money at 65 because a bird in hand beats 2 in the bush. I don't say that anymore. I wasn't accounting for how much the CRA claws back once RRIF withdrawals hit at 72, or how a smaller RRSP balance at 70 means a smaller forced withdrawal at 72 and every year after it. The trade-off looks like this. You give up $742.31 a month for 5 years, roughly $44,539 in total. In exchange, if you use that window to move money from your RRSP into your TFSA, where the current limit sits at $7,000 a year, you can realistically shelter $15,000 or more in taxes over the next couple of decades, money that would otherwise show up as clawed back OAS or a higher marginal rate on your RRIF withdrawals. None of this works if you don't have enough saved to actually live on during those 5 years. So what happens when your RRSP is smaller than you thought it would be at this point? That's where the real stress test begins. Meet Robert and Linda, both 64, both a year from their own OAS decision, sitting on $275,000 in combined RRSPs. On paper, deferring to 70 looks like the obvious move, a 36% larger check, guaranteed for the rest of both their lives. But getting from 64 to 70 without OAS means bridging the gap somehow. For Robert and Linda, that means pulling $3,500 a month out of their RSPs, on top of the roughly $925 a month each is already getting from CPP. That's real money, leaving a real account every single month, years before OAS shows up to help carry the load. None of that is a criticism of their plan. It's simply what deferring requires in practice. A 5-year stretch where the portfolio does all the work OAS would otherwise be doing. Now add one ordinary bad year. In year 2 of that bridge period, the market drops 15%, the kind of dip that shows up in most 20-year stretches at some point. Their $275,000 portfolio, already being drained by $3,500 a month in withdrawals, gets hit twice at once by the market and once by their own spending. By the time they reach 70 and finally collect that larger OAS check, their private savings look nothing like they did at 64. Now run the other version. Robert and Linda take OAS at 65 instead. Combined, that's roughly $1,485 a month landing in their account before they touch a dollar of RRSP money. Their monthly draw from savings drops from $3,500 to about $2,000. When that same 15% market drop hits, it's absorbing a much smaller withdrawal, and the portfolio has room to recover. This is what a sequence of return shock actually does to a retirement plan. It isn't the market drop itself that ruins people. It's being forced to sell more of a shrinking portfolio at exactly the wrong time, month after month, just to cover the mortgage payment or the property tax bill that doesn't care what the market did last quarter. Follow the fragile version far enough, and by around age 78, Robert and Linda's private savings are exhausted, years before either of them expected. Follow the resilient version, and that same $275,000 still has a cushion left for a bad year, a health scare, or just peace of mind. The OAS check was the same size in both stories eventually. What changed was whether the portfolio survived long enough to matter. There's one group, though, where this entire calculation tilts hard toward taking the money early, and it's a group most retirement content quietly ignores. Everything we just walked through assumes there's a spouse in the picture, someone whose household takes the hit if you die early. If you're single, that entire trap disappears. Your decision becomes a much simpler bet on your own lifespan. Statistics Canada's own numbers put a 65-year-old man's life expectancy at roughly 84 and a woman's at roughly 87. For a single person with no survivor to protect, the break-even age on deferring OAS lands around 82. Live past that, and waiting until 70 wins outright, die before it, and taking the money at 65 wins instead, with no household left to absorb the loss either way. That break-even number isn't a guess. It comes from dividing the foregone payments by the size of the deferral increase, the same math used for a couple, just without a second person's risk attached to it. It helps to know the system wasn't built for today's numbers. When OAS started in the 1960s, life expectancy at birth sat closer to 71. The benefit was designed for someone to collect it for maybe 6 years. Nobody was modeling a 25-year retirement because almost nobody lived one. Today, a healthy 65-year-old could easily collect for 25 years or more. Think about how that plays out day to day. A single retiree on a fixed income still has to cover the same property tax bill and the same hydro bill as a couple, just with one income stream instead of two. That's exactly why the math for a single person deserves its own conversation instead of being folded into advice written for couples. So if you're single, the real risk isn't dying early. Money left unspent simply becomes part of your estate, which isn't a tragedy. The real risk runs the other way, living into your 90s on a smaller monthly check than you could have locked in, watching your own savings run thinner every year you're still around to need them. If the math is this clean for a single retiree, why does taking the money at 65 still feel like the obvious, comfortable choice? It isn't because you skipped the arithmetic. It's because of something wired into you long before retirement planning existed. There's a name for why waiting feels so uncomfortable, even when the math favors it. Behavioral economists call it hyperbolic discounting. Our brains are wired to value $100 in your hand today, more than $136 5 years from now, even when that $136 is guaranteed and adjusted for inflation every quarter. It helps to notice when that instinct shows up. It's the same feeling that makes a sale sign in a store window feel urgent, even though you didn't need the item 5 minutes earlier. OAS deferral doesn't come with a countdown clock, but the brain treats it like one anyway. That instinct isn't a character flaw. If it feels like the government is handing you a gift, and that waiting means it might get taken away, or the rules might change before you get another chance, that's a completely normal response after 40 years of paying into a system you never got to opt out of. The shift that actually helps is a small one. Stop thinking of OAS as income you're either collecting or missing out on. Think of it as longevity insurance instead. You're not losing money by waiting 5 years. You're buying a bigger guaranteed check for the version of you who's 90 years old, and doesn't have the option to go back to work. I remember my uncle taking his OAS the moment he turned 65. He didn't need the money. He just said he wanted his share before the rules changed on him. A few years later, the clawback took roughly half of it back anyway, because his other income put him well past the threshold. Before we get to the checklist, there's one more fear worth naming directly. A lot of people hold off on making any decision at all because they're convinced the government is going to move the goalposts on them next. It's a fair worry. Plenty of people watching this believe the OAS clawback threshold will get pulled down, or that the eligibility age will move from 65 to 67 again. It's happened before. In 2012, the eligibility age was scheduled to rise to 67, and that change was reversed before it ever took effect. 65 has held for a long time, and OAS is funded out of general tax revenue rather than a dedicated pension fund the way CPP is, which changes the kind of political pressure it faces. That distinction matters more than most people realize, because funding structure, not sentiment, tends to decide which benefits get protected over the long run. That history doesn't guarantee anything about the future, but it does mean this decision deserves 3 concrete checks instead of a guess. First, look at your own net world income. If you're sitting anywhere close to $95,323 deferring, isn't just about a bigger check later. It becomes a tax strategy that keeps you out of the recovery tax zone for a few more years. Second, run the survivor gap calculation honestly. If your spouse has no pension income of their own, taking OAS at 65 puts real cash into the household right away, instead of betting that both of you will still be around in 5 years to benefit from waiting. Third, remember the number most people forget. At 75, OAS automatically increases by 10%. You don't apply for it or plan around it, it just happens. And it's worth factoring into how you picture your cash flow in your late 70s and beyond. None of these 3 checks take more than an afternoon with your own tax return and a calculator, and together they tell you more than any single break-even chart ever will. If this level of detail is the kind of thing that helps you sleep better at night, that's exactly what this channel is for. Subscribe, and we'll keep working through the 2026 rules together. So where does this leave you? Deferring OAS to 70 is a genuinely strong move for tax planning, and for anyone confident they, or their spouse, will live well into their 90s. But it also creates a recovery period of nearly 14 years if the person deferring dies early, and that's not a risk any calculator puts on the screen for you. There isn't a single right answer here. There's only the answer that's right for your household, your health, and the person you're planning around. If taking the money at 65 means you actually relax and enjoy your first 5 years of retirement, instead of stretching every RRSP dollar, that peace of mind is a real win, even if it isn't the biggest number on the page. There's no prize for waiting the longest, and no penalty for choosing comfort, only the outcome that actually fits the life you're living. Run your own numbers before you decide. Look at your spouse's income, your own health, and how much of a cushion you actually have if the market has a bad year right when you need it not to. The math matters. So does the person living it. This is Brian's Canadian Retirement Playbook. Plan for the math, but live for the person.